Okay, well, we'll get rolling here because we're 7:05. So thank you all for dialing in to our December New Yorkers for Mental Health Alternatives. Can you hear me, Pammy? Can everyone else hear me? Can you hear me,
Yes.
David? Okay, all right. Thank you for coming. I'm excited to introduce Dr. Michael Beug. I, as some of you may know, am the psilocybin correspondent for the Committee on Medicinal Mushrooms with the North American Mycological Association. And Dr. Beug here is on the Toxicology Committee, and we've convinced him to also join the Medicinal Mushroom Committee. And one of the things that we're working on is a self-reporting database that it will be accessible through the NYMHA website. So if you are taking some kind of mushroom supplement or mushrooms at home, then you'll be able to. I don't know what's. Oh, I was to unmute. Yeah, don't know where that sound's coming from. But the idea is that it will drive further research so that we can look at this database and go, look, oh, these like 700 people took turkey tail, and these are the results that they had, and let's do an official kind of study on it. So that hopefully is the outcome, and obviously Michael will talk a little bit more about that too. A little bit more about him is he taught chemistry, mycology, and organic farming at Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington for 32 years. He is active in NYMHA and the Pacific Northwest Key Council. And he's published a myriad of books. But one of the things that I'm really excited to hear from him is how he has helped on the West Coast try to push access for psilocybin-containing mushrooms. So let me put you on a full screen here, Michael, and then you can take it away.
Okay, well, I'll just go to share screen then. And so I prepared this slide tape program a number of years ago and update it regularly as things change. But this is kind of a history of the use of psilocybin mushrooms in North America, starting with the May 13th, 1957 articles by R. Gordon Wasson. And let's see, I need to get in to actually show this slideshow. Was there a question?
No, Mike, or
Is it working?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay. So if I start showing people how Watson took 6 pair of mushrooms from Maria Sabina, and I know exactly what the species was and know the chemistry of them. So when we started working with psilocybe mushrooms in the Pacific Northwest, which I started working on those in 1975, and I held a Schedule 1, 2, 3, and 4 drug licenses until my retirement in 2001, but was actively doing research on the chemistry of these things through about the middle of 1985, 1986. And I just quickly, these are the different mushrooms that were used in Mexico for altered states. And this is the mushroom that Wasson actually took in his experiments, the Psilocybe caerulescens. And here's the mushroom in situ in Mexico, rather dried out. And also Psilocybe cubensis. And this is important because when Timothy Leary was asked to shake up the psychology department at Harvard and went down to Mexico and got introduced to the magic mushrooms there. It was Psilocybe cubensis that he consumed. And then the work that he did at Harvard until they got fired was on synthetic psilocybin and psilocin made by Albert Hofmann in Switzerland. So here's Timothy Leary, who I actually carefully avoided meeting whenever I had a chance because I thought he was doing a lot more harm than good. His teaching partner at the time was Richard Alpert, and when they got fired, Richard went to India to study Indian medicine, took the name Ram Dass, which for a long time I thought was just some hippie name. And then in 2010, when I was writing a history of this time period, I realized that I looked up and found that Ram Dass literally means servant of God, because Richard Alpert had been a non-practicing Jew, and his experiences with the psilocybe mushrooms made him very, very deeply religious. And he devoted the rest of his life to exploring the religious aspects of the psilocybe mushrooms. And I got involved in 1975 when 3 particular students showed up at my door, all wanting to learn about mushrooms, and me not realizing that what they really wanted to know was about psilocybe mushrooms, which at the time I had never even heard of their existence. They weren't in any of my mushroom books, and nobody was doing anything with them. But the picture of the 2 people in the field hunting for liberty caps is the field right next to my house in Olympia, which was very copious producer of Psilocybe semilanceata, which was the mushroom I was most interested in, because it was consistently 1% psilocybin with no psilocin by dry weight. And therefore, if we're going to do experiments with the mushroom, this is the one that I knew would produce predictable results. Now, Jonathan Ott only worked with me for a year. He became good friends both with Albert Hofmann and with R. Gordon Wasson. He translated Hoffman's book, LSD, My Problem Child, from German into English. He also wrote a lot about hallucinogenic mushrooms, and he wrote the Fest script for Wasson when Wasson passed away. Now, Paul Stamets worked with me full-time for 4 years. I was his only professor, and he got his undergraduate degree studying mushrooms in general, but psilocybe mushrooms in particular. And Jeremy Bigwood, I'm not sure was ever a real student. He's stuck around Evergreen for 6 years and then vanished without a degree, but we're pretty sure he was CIA. And he's the one who actually arranged for me to get a Schedule 1, 2, 3, and 4 drug license, as well as pure psilocybin and psilocin standards. And I should have wondered how a student could have those kind of connections. So that's my history with him. And here's the mushroom I was most interested in, Psilocybe semilanceata. And a very similar mushroom, similar chemistry as Psilocybe subpimentaria. We also, at the time, had a lot of Psilocybe baeocystis, which has largely disappeared, and Psilocybe cyanescens, which is still all over and very widely gathered. This is about twice as potent as the Psilocybe semilanceata. It's about 2% by dry weight. And Psilocybe stuntzii is very weak, about 0.1% to 0.5%, but a very, very abundant mushroom known as the blue ringer. And it tends to grow like in soccer fields, schoolyards, prison yards. So I would get calls like from the prison or calls from the governor's office asking me, what are all the people doing on their hands and knees in the beauty bark beds or on the lawns or on the soccer field or on the exercise yards at the prisons. but it was usually this mushroom or Psilocybe baeocystis. And cyanofibrillosa is another mushroom that is largely disappeared, but we have some new species like Psilocybe ovidius. So people are constantly moving these species around the country, particularly these wood-inhabiting mushrooms like baeocystis, cyanofibrillosa, and cyanescens, and also azurescens, which is over 2% by dry weight, psilocybin and psilocin. So here's azurescens. They're also called flying saucers is a common name. They appear to be closely related to the cyanescens, except they have a very smooth cap margin, very even, where the cap on the cyanescens is very wrinkled. But Alani is a newer species that we have that's spreading widely. Folliculosa is possibly the only native mushroom that's been here forever that contains a small amount of psilocybin. But the mushroom that's legal now in Oregon under supervised conditions is Psilocybe cubensis. And one of the reasons that they're most interested in this is that the wood inhabiting mushrooms in particular tend to have fairly high levels of baeocystin, norbaeocystin, and some other chemicals. And what they're legalizing out west now is largely the mushrooms that just have psilocybin and psilocin. And we're hoping to keep it strictly making mushrooms legal rather than making just the pure chemical psilocybin or psilocin, because the experience seems to be better, more beneficial to people from the whole mushroom. And also that way, some drunk company cannot get control of the market of psilocybin and psilocin and jack the price way up and make it unreachable as a medicinal source for people. And this mushroom is very easy to cultivate. And when I was working with it, it tended to be about 0.5% psilocybin and psilocin. And by the time I was at the end of my research, it was running about 1 to 1.2% psilocybin and psilocin. Now I think they've got strains of this that they've bred by selective collection of spores and crossbreeding between subspecies from various parts of the world that are well in excess of 2% by dry weight psilocybin and psilocin. But this is becoming the standard and indeed the only acceptable mushroom to use, but not freely used, but to use in a supervised setting. That we started doing workshops on psilocybin and psilocin by the spring of 1976 is the very first one. Gaston Guzman in the upper left is talking to one of my graduate professors from the University of Washington, Scott Chilton, at that very first conference. And on the right top, Dr. Daniel Stuntz, who was then the University of Washington mycologist, is shown in another scene talking to Dr. Guzman. There's a couple of enthusiasts who were members of the Key Council in the mid picture. The lower left, we've got Dr. Andrew Weil, and he's the one who wrote the Crimson articles that exposed what Timothy Leary and Ram Dass were doing, because he wanted access to the mushrooms because he was an undergraduate doctoral student at Harvard at the time that Leary and was doing his work. And another scientist involved very much in the Psilocybe species identification early on is Alexander H. Smith in the red hat, and he's talking to the New Yorker that many of you will know, Gary Linkoff. And at the far right, bottom right, is Stephen Pollack, and he was known as the Texas Psilocybe doctor. And probably in the late 80s, I think was about the time that it happened, Paul Stamets was talking to Pollack on the phone, and he left to answer the door, heard a gunshot, and what later turned out to be a Texas state trooper had assassinated Pollock because of his work. So this is something that is politically a firebrand issue because psilocybin and psilocin was interfering with the Vietnam War. Yeah, the idea was, the psilocybe mushrooms make people very relaxed, peaceful, loving, and caring. And the sayings at the time were make love, not war. And I would advocate today that we need to be using psilocybe mushrooms routinely in church services to make people more accepting of one another. And so here's some of the books that are coming out in this early time period between in the mid, probably starting about 1974 through about 1985. And Paul Stamets wrote two books for his undergraduate thesis. One was The Mushroom Cultivator with Jeff Chilton, and the other Psilocybe Mushrooms and Their Allies solo. But you can see several publications there that involve Jonathan Ott and some other researchers at the time. So also, there are things in the genus Panellus that have psilocybin and psilocin, but not a lot of things that people look for, especially in non-tropical areas. The Panellus species are not active, but Panellus subalteatus is moderately active. Fonsecii may or may not be active in some areas. I've never found anything in it. Canosabe species can have psilocybin. You see some of the bluing. But the problem with the psilocybes is mistaking them for Galerina marginata on the left, which has a rusty brown spore print, versus Psilocybe folliculosa or Beocystis, or the mushrooms, the psilocybe mushrooms that can be growing with literally adjacent to and touching in bark beds. So, and we've had some deaths in the Pacific Northwest from people who have consumed Galerina marginata, and it has amatoxins. This little Pholiotena phalaris, probably not phalaris itself. There's another mushroom that people mistakenly pick, but there haven't been any deaths from it, but it has amatoxin. But Gymnopolis species, you can see the green on the cap. That's the blue from the psilocybin on the sort of orange-yellow color of the mushroom itself, gives a green color. So these are the hallucinogenic mushrooms, luteifolius. And out west, we have what people think is Big Laughing Jim, which you have in New York. And the New York species are bitter and active, but what we have out west isn't. But we do have several different polluted species that have psilocybin and psilocin. And nationwide, possessing these mushrooms, even if you don't know they have psilocybin and psilocin, is illegal. Where Amanita muscaria and Pantherina are completely legal. And my theory is they're legal because eating them tends to make people very violent and ready to go to war and ready to fight. And the psilocybe mushrooms are banned because they make people so peace-loving and quiet. And I've been to about 9 big hallucinogenic mushroom conferences at this point. And it's really striking to see how peaceful, how quiet those events are. I've never seen a bad reaction. I probably watched a couple thousand people who were being mushroomed. I even went ahead and tried them once myself. It had a permanent effect on me, but I'm going to skip over that part for now unless we want to talk about later. There are things that appear to have psilocybin and psilocin because they have a blue base, but these do not. They're not active mushrooms. But Terence McKenna had the theory that early hominids, which pretty much evolved in this subtropical region of the world, would be following large ungulates around and picking Psilocybe cubensis, both to eat and the mind-altering effects of the Psilocybe cubensis were related to evolving the large brain of humans. Now, the last time that I met Terence McKenna was the one time I tried the mushrooms in 1985 at Breitenbush. And I took about, well, we started with 15 mushrooms. This is the Brighton Bush conference that followed in 1999. And 15 mushrooms was enough for Gary Linkoff. 150 wasn't enough for me. So you have some very huge variations. But when I got to over 200 and included some cyanesins and some other much more powerful mushrooms than just Liberty caps, uh, it permanently changed me to be more understanding and relaxed. So in 1999, we hadn't had a conference for 14 years, but at the end of the biennium at Halloween, we all gathered at Brighton Bush for one last big event. And I just observed, here's Andy Weil in the sort of center orange shirt. He's got the big beard on, and I'm right in front of Andy. Gary Linkoff is two people to the right as we're looking at the image of Andy. Andy cooked up this huge pot of psilocybin and psilocin. Virtually everyone in this photograph got quite thoroughly stoned. You'll see a lot of famous people in there. David Aurora is there, and a lot of people that were, Shulgin is there. Of course, Paul Stamets. This photo was taken by Paul's brother, John. And so the modern era really gets started, though, about right around the late 1900s, 1990s, they started doing research on psilocybin, particularly on the East Coast. And it was an article in the Oregonian in 2010 that opened my eyes to the personality shift that was possible with these drugs. And then, so I wrote a couple of articles for this special double issue of Fungi magazine. And there was a later article where they advocate the use of these mushrooms in religion, both of which I support. And here's the Telluride Mushroom Conference. I've only been there once. That's me in the lower left-hand corner. But a very interesting event. Again, marked by just calm, friendliness, joy, and beauty. And then there's been a whole series of papers out, and the neurogenesis ability, and the idea of whether or not microdosing is going to help. And there's not good data on that one yet, but there's a lot of interest in that. But even in Newsweek, this is in 2021. This is the front page of Newsweek. We're proposing the new treatment for depression, magic mushrooms as the new Prozac. And then Michael Pollan wrote How to Change Your Mind. We had a lot of long talks about psilocybin when he was writing it. And this has really brought the issue to the foreground. I have to have a little bit of fun with it. This talk is designed to generally take about an hour. But what I'm really interested in is using psilocybe mushrooms to eliminate excessive loyalty to the nation, to your group, and to your religion by empathy, kindness, and openness. And I believe there's a religious use for psilocybin mushrooms, and very much believe in the use of these mushrooms in a supervised clinical setting. And it's now legal in Oregon. I live about a 20-minute drive from Oregon, and people can book trips. My only concern at the moment is that it's still rather expensive to do it. But that's just a quick overview of what we're doing here. And there's a big push right now in Washington State to get a similar law in Washington allowing the use of Psilocybe cubensis itself in clinical settings, and also decriminalizing the possession of psilocybin and psilocin. So now we'll just open it up for discussion, but that's quickly what I've been up to myself. And I give this talk as often as I get a chance.
Wow. First of all, thank you for all the work that you've done. um, I personally have so many questions, and I'm going to ask at least one right off the bat. We are right now drafting one of the laws that is being discussed in New York, and I think we only put in psilocybin-containing mushrooms. Now, you mentioned baeocystin and the other
Norbaeocystin.
norbaeocystin. Are there mushrooms that contain those two substances but not psilocybin?
No.
Okay. So by saying mushrooms that contain psilocybin as a chemical, we're creating an umbrella under which all of those mushrooms are then consumable.
Yeah, but the problem you're going to run into with having the broader approach where you allow baeocystin and norbaeocystin is that those drugs can cause temporary paralysis, and it can last a half hour to an hour or more. And if somebody is using recreationally, rather than in a supervised supervised setting, then they could die of hypothermia before somebody finds them. They're out in the cold and the wet. And so there's considerable concern about the safety of mushrooms that contain anything other than psilocybin and psilocin. And that's why in Oregon, you're limited to Psilocybe cubensis. Now, Paul Stamets and I both argued for allowing cyanescens and azure, and in particular, azurescens is a little stronger. So we sort of set my idea was to cut it off at cyanescens. There's reasons I like the idea of including baeocystin and norbaeocystin, but it's considered enough more dangerous that I think right now it might torpedo your effects in the East Coast.
Does anyone
okay? Yeah.
Does anyone have any other questions, comments?
I was actually a little curious. You mentioned a number of psilocybin-containing species that are no longer around. Are those species that you just aren't seeing people, like reports of people using, or are those species that are just totally gone from the natural environment?
Well, I think a couple of those were actively being spread by Jeremy Bigwood when he was here in the Northwest. And when he wasn't around anymore, and they weren't continually being reintroduced, they gradually got outcompeted by other species.
Okay.
But they're still found, but they're not common. And I have seen no reference to the psilocybe that Paul Stamets and I found, which at the time was growing at the Weyerhaeuser main office between Seattle and Tacoma, on about 30 acres of rhododendrons. And it was basically 30 acres of solid psilocybes. They were just touching cap to cap. And now you don't hear from it at all. Where Psilocybe ovidius cystidiata, I've never yet seen myself, but starting in the spring, there's all kinds of posts on Facebook with people, and it's all ovidius cystidiata. So it's actively being spread. And like cyanescens, all you need is the base of a stem, and you throw it in a pile of wood chips and keep it moist. Same thing with Psilocybe azurescens. Just cut off the base of the stem, which you don't. If you're using the mushrooms, you wouldn't be using the base anyway, and just throw it in the wood chips, and pretty soon you have a garden of Psilocybe azurescens. Now, mind you, I don't ever grow these things myself. Using them once, I'm really glad I used them once, and it had a permanent effect. but I don't want to be out of commission for 6 hours at a time. I find life way too exciting and way too enjoyable. But for people that are having trouble, it's really, really important as far as I'm concerned. And it was important for me because it really made me a much more caring and sensitive individual. It just took a hell of a lot of mushrooms in my case. I mean, when I tell the story how I actually did it, I did it. There were four of us, three NYMHA officers and myself. I mean, I was a NYMHA member, but we had the president of NYMHA, the vice president, and the secretary, and myself at Brighton Bush. And at the time, you're not even allowed to talk about psilocybin if you're in NYMHA. And so, and I brought 200 Liberty caps with me to that meeting and gave everyone 15 mushrooms because I calculated that was enough dose for what they've come to call at Johns Hopkins a heroic dose. And it certainly was plenty for Gary Linkoff and Linnea Gilman. At 15, they were gone, and Kit and I just sitting there looking at each other, really disappointed. So we took 30 apiece more, and we waited, and nothing happened. So we split the rest of the 200 and ate those. And then we went to hear Linkoff's lecture. And nothing ever happened to Kit the whole evening. But it wasn't Linkoff's lecture. I mean, Linkoff was at the lecture heckling, but it was, we were hearing about how psilocybe mushrooms were actually beings from Mars come to invade the Earth. But people were passing around cyanescens, and I ate a full handful of cyanescens. And at the end of the talk, still nothing. So I'm walking out of the building, and somebody's standing on the front porch with a bag of cubensis. And I took a double handful, and I ate those as I walked Kit and Maggie back to their cabin. And I said goodnight to them. And then I met with Repke, who's eating. He was doing research on baeocystin and norbaeocystin while I'm working on psilocybin and psilocin. But we're both wine lovers. In fact, I've just recently retired from 52 years as a winemaker. And we drank 3 nice bottles of wine. Well, his roommates were all just be mushroomed, quiet, peaceful. But I'm really bummed at this point when I left Repke and started walking back in a drizzly rain in this old growth forest to my cabin. And it wasn't until I laid down and closed my eyes that I left the planet. I wasn't sure I was ever going to come back again. But all I had to do was open my eyes, and it was over. So then I got up and woke up Maggie and Maggie Rogers and Kit. And Kit desperately wanted more mushrooms, but I'd eaten everything. So she just had to listen to me narrate the trip for the next hour. It was very spectacular, very colorful. And there's a video interpretation of that trip on my website, mushroomsofcascadia.com, because I was interviewed about the trip. And actually, I gave a talk at a mushroom conference this fall, and that was videotaped and then turned into a presentation that's on my website. And it's quite entertaining, and you folks might find it useful to go to my website and extract that talk. It was by Aaron Hilliard, is the guy that did the work, and he did a really beautiful job.
I will certainly, when I post this video, I'll make sure I link that, and I'll see if I can put it on our website, because I can't wait to watch that.
Yeah, it's a readily available YouTube video.
So,
Hey guys.
So you said you had a field right next to your house where you had Liberty caps, but
Right.
you just never tried them?
No, not for 10 years. I researched the mushrooms for 10 years before I ate one. But when I ate one, I ate a lot.
I mean, that was quite a jump. You went from 15 to 45, but still didn't have a noticeable effect. That's
Yeah, and no effect when I approached 100 either.
I do have to ask, when you're talking about like double fisting cubensis as you walk out of the hall, was that dried or was that fresh weight?
fresh.
Okay,
Everything I ate that night was fresh,
Ah. Well,
nothing dried.
that could be why it took a
Mhm.
while to metabolize, though, isn't it? Because don't you need heat to make some of the active molecules bioavailable?
No, heat breaks it down. You don't want heat if you can avoid it. Now, it only took 30 minutes for Gary Linkoff and Linnea. So you can't argue that it was the fact that they were eating fresh versus
Fair.
dried.
Fair.
And the fact, and Kid only had about 100, and that wasn't enough for her.
Only. Wow.
But
Wow. Did anyone online have any questions for Michael? Yeah, Robert.
Yeah, I have a question about the CIA agent provocateur. Just kind of, I mean, the access to all this sort of power is interesting, but also, did he try to particularly direct your research in any way, or encourage or discourage?
no, I didn't really have any suspicion until years later when I realized I should have wondered where all this was coming from. But also, I followed the history of this student who disappeared. Well, I didn't tell you the story about the Hollywood bank robber who was a student of mine and my wife's both, and he was a friend of Jonathan. And after he's the most successful bank robber in American history, and he lived in a treehouse across the street from the campus. But anyway, he was a good friend of Jeremy, and there was a student who disappeared. And Jeremy was very relieved when he discovered that Scott, the Hollywood bandit, had eventually been killed he'd actually committed suicide just before the police pumped 200 bullets into his hiding place. But
Wow.
there were several other things that I know about this individual I don't want to put on tape that make me suspect he had some very deep connections with some very dark, high-level politics, and he now lives in Washington, D.C.
Huh. And you said when Paul got his degree, you were his only teacher?
Well, I mean, officially, Alexander Smith would come out from Michigan to use our scanning electron microscope because he didn't have one. And, well, they had them at the university, but mere mycologists couldn't use one. But at Evergreen, the students could use the SEM. And so he would come and do research. So he was connected with a lot of really neat and important people. And Kit Skates Barnhart, who is the co-founder of the Pacific Northwest Key Council, along with Dr. Daniel Stuntz, would come out all the time. She was my children's third grandmother, honorary grandmother. And so he had a lot of teachers, but I was his only official teacher, but I don't know who was the teacher and who was the student for that matter, because I had no clue about these mushrooms. It was a total surprise to me.
Oh my God. Any other questions from anyone here? My only other so can you talk for a minute about the medical database and then perhaps like the impact on people using psilocybe strains or Pinellas? Oh, actually, the other thing, I had no idea there were Pluteuses with psilocybin.
There were what?
You said a Pluteus.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Huh.
We've got
on the West Coast.
I don't think so. We also have anosabes that have psilocybin.
And there's
It's
some clitoscopy.
it's a gene transfer across genera, where that particular package gets transferred between a number of different genera.
Huh.
And nobody understands the utility and why organisms would pick it up and reproduce it. But psilocybin has been fairly widely moved across genera, but it originated probably with Psilocybe cubensis. As near as we can tell, that's one of the first things that ever had psilocybin and psilocin in it. And then we've had radial gene transfer out from that.
Wild.
Yeah.
Huh. Well, can you take a minute to talk about the medical database?
Well, okay. I mean, I proposed it because I've been working with a range of people with a wide range of different cancers. And in the work I've been doing, I've been working with cases where people have visible tumors, or they have prostate cancer. So there's a PSA you can measure and track. Although PSA is not a perfect, there are other things that cause PSA to go up and down. But when somebody's PSA goes from 300 to 5, when you start using medicinal mushrooms, then that gets my attention. And when I can take a large tumor and put a mushroom cream on it and have that tumor gone, well, a large tumor with a big, a silver dollar size weeping wound that wouldn't heal, I can have it healed and the tumor gone in 2 months. Now, I thought we ought to be collecting this kind of information. Now, that's not just 1, 2, or 3 people. I'm now up in a number of people. And skin cancer. I haven't had anyone come to me who had melanoma, but I've had a number of people who've had other, including myself, and that's how I figured out the skin cancers. It was experimenting on myself. And I've been experimenting on myself on prostate cancer because 15 years ago, they wanted me to go in for an exam. And I just started taking medicinal mushrooms that I thought would work. And I had my colonoscopy 3 weeks ago, and they said, "Oh, we need to have you see a urologist because your prostate doesn't look real good." And then I just got the report back 3 days ago saying, "Oh, it's canceled the urologist. We just looked at your data from 15 years ago, and you're way better. You're in better shape than you were 15 years ago." They haven't cured the prostate cancer. I've just stopped it cold and partially reversed it.
Wow.
So that's in my cell. And the skin cancer, I just had, it was right in the center of my forehead. And I looked at some older pictures. It had been there for a couple, 3 years. And I started on a cream that Martin Osas, a friend of mine in Canada, has developed. And 20 days before my surgery, the surgeon says, "Boy, we thought this was going to be a lot bigger." And then he said, "Boy, that healed fast." 3 months later, and when I had my 1-year checkup this August, he said, "Well, come back in a year. There's nothing. All your precancerous spots are gone."
Wow.
Now I've got about 4 other cases just like that. So I've got a lot of stuff that I want to start documenting. But when I have somebody with an incurable lung cancer who is now approaching 3 years and was given 18 to 24 months to live with no chance of a cure, and that's 18 to 24 months with immunotherapy, and they're still around. The immunotherapy didn't work at all, and they are healthier than they've been in 15, 20 years because they had a lot of comorbidities, and the comorbidities are all gone. There was not a single side effect of the mushroom, nothing, except you got better and better and felt better and better. And the tumors, you could feel them shrink and be gone because there were, in addition to the lung cancer tumors, there were some tumors that you could actually see that right on the surface. And I got rid of them. They're gone.
Incredible.
The cancer's not gone. It's just stopped.
Yeah. So,
So yeah, I want to document that stuff. But uterine cancer, colon cancer, prostate cancer, I, I think somebody's now trying it on brain cancer. That's going to be the hardest test.
what mushroom? What mushroom?
A lot of them.
Well, but specifically for the brain cancer.
Oh, for the brain cancer? Well, I think, well, definitely lion's mane, reishi, and the and maitake.
Huh.
Those would be all. You have to pardon me if I hesitate a little. At 80, I forget names for a while. It takes a while for them to come back. Yeah.
The way you rattled off all the psilocybe strains, I wouldn't tell.
So, but one of the things I'm using right now, I've just said, Avery, I sent you all those papers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Last spring, I did a research from the previous 5 years. And then I just finished a couple weeks ago, everything in the last 24 months to get as up to date as possible. But if I summarize the mushrooms that there seems to be the most interest in internationally, it pretty closely mimics what Paul Stamets has in his Stamets 7 mix. But that's just one of the things that I use. But I use his turkey tail stuff, his agaricon, and his lion's mane. And I use his products not because he's my student, but because he employs a large PhD scientific team who tests the strains of these things. You know, one turkey tail strain is not going to be the same as the next strain, and how you treat it, how you raise it. And a lot of people say you've got to have the fruit bodies. I'm convinced that for some mushrooms, you want half fruit bodies and half mycelium, but in other things, you want mycelium, and you want it on the grain in which you grew it. And it doesn't matter what the grain is, but the grain itself gets converted by the mushroom into something that is itself a potent anti-cancer agent. And indeed, the Chinese, they never sell the two together, but they sell both. And they use them for different cancers. So I'm looking at using as much as mainly those things, but then I also buy. I use a lot of shiitake and shiitake tea. Now, for example, on the woman who I was working with who had the lung cancer, she had also been in severe pain and she'd been on fentanyl for 10 or 15 years and other really heavy drugs to deal with the pain. And nothing I did to shrink the tumors and anything had any effect on the pain. But then she had a candida infection, and my Canadian friends suggested some shiitake extract, which I didn't have, so I made shiitake tea. Just went to the store and bought some fresh shiitake and brewed up a tea. And within 2 weeks, the candida infection was gone, but she kept drinking the tea. And within 3 months, the pain was half what it had been. Within a year, the pain was 10% of what it had been for the last 10 or 15 years.
Wow.
So there are things besides just cancer. There's a lot of amazing broad spectrum chemistry going on with whole mushrooms. And so I'm using a lot of different things.
So,
and believe it's important to be using all of them. I'm not looking for a magic bullet, the magic chemical that I can extract from the mushroom.
So just to bring it back around to psilocybin-containing mushrooms, we had a pharmacist attend one of our meetings, and we were talking about fibromyalgia because that's one of the things that people often come into me with, like, hey, is there a mushroom for fibromyalgia? And he pointed out that there are tests using SSRIs to treat fibromyalgia right now. Have you heard of anything about psilocybe potentially impacting that?
I don't know why it wouldn't, but no, I haven't. I mean, look, I mean, I think people should be having mushrooms in their diet at least 3 days a week. And psilocybes are included in that list of things I think should be in that diet. But I'm not looking for any 1, 2, or 3 magic bullets. It's this broader spectrum. One of the same stuff the same thing I'm using to deal with cancer is probably one of the best things you could do to deal with diabetes, especially very advanced diabetes and diabetic sores, and to heal those. And it's no different. I don't know why it's working. Maybe I don't really care. Well, actually, I know partly why it's working. They're antioxidants, they're anti-inflammatories, they cause apoptosis. I'm an enzyme kineticist by training, and these things are very potent enzyme inhibitors, but they also are very potent food for your microbiome. And you have a much stronger microbiome, and therefore you're much stronger defense against everything.
Yeah.
And that's Alzheimer's, it's Parkinson's, it's your cluster headaches. I don't care what it is. It's basically the same bleeping recipe, as near as I can tell.
Yeah. Well, what a wonderful sentiment to end on. We do have some more like internal stuff that we have to go over, but I mean, unless you had anything else you wanted to add, or anyone else any other? Oh,
I
Carrie.
actually do have one small question. So when you're processing cannabis, one of the things that you mentioned full spectrum. One of the things that some people try to do is preserve the plant material as close as it is in its natural state to, just retain as chemically similar as possible. That's referred to as full spectrum or live spectrum. Do you think there's any similar effects on how mushrooms of any type are processed into different medicines or things like that that could affect them? Like you were talking about using the mycelium. Is there something about that when it's processed a certain way, or does grinding them up make them less or more efficacious or something like that?
I don't have a necessarily good answer for that. And my friend Martin Osis from Canada actually came down I hadn't seen him for years. He came down and spent 2 days at my house before we went to the NYMHA meeting over Halloween. And all we did is talk medicinal mushrooms nonstop. But he wanted to go out and collect certain mushrooms that I have here that he doesn't have up in Canada. And he went out, he wanted to process them immediately, non-dry, non-anything, because he wanted every aspect of the essence of the mushroom in what he was making. And then from that, he makes mushroom creams. And as a base for those creams, I really believe in this Chinese snow fungus that I started to use. It's incredibly delicious. It's something to put in your soups. It beats the heck out of using some starch thickener to thicken your soup. And it makes an anti-cancer sunscreen all by itself, but you can add some extra things. But it's nutritious. So I go as much for the whole mushroom as possible. But if I've got dry, that's what I work with. If I got fresh, that's what I'll work with. And I'm not going to get too worried about it.
Is that Tremula fusiformis?
Tremula fusiformis, that's correct. It actually grows wild on the East Coast down south of you folks.
Oh no, here, right where we are.
Right.
Yeah.
The trick is to get ones that are about the size of a little bigger than you want about the size of a softball or a little bigger to have the right amount. And I don't know if you get that big a growth there. The Chinese are really good at growing those big. They are the weirdest fun. That it starts out as a yeast.
What?
And it looks kind of like a little bit of slime on the branch, and it moves along the branch until it encounters an annular hypoxylon, a carbon ball. and then it eats that carbon ball and transforms into the jelly fungus and fruits.
I did not know that.
That's absolutely the only way you can grow. That's how they grow it.
So
It's
is
a
it
dual
parasitic then?
inoculation of the annulo hypoxylon.
Well, it's like a lobster mushroom. It's like a lactiflora.
Like a hypomesis,
Yeah.
hypomesis infecting
yeah,
like a russula.
Yeah.
Yeah, but this is a case where the this little slimy thing that actually moves by itself, which is literally a yeast. Then when it parasitizes the hypoxylon's gone completely, but then it fruits.
That is so. The hypoxylon is black, solid black, and it
Yep.
turns into the white snowball.
Yep.
That is incredible. That's incredible.
Yeah. That and shiitake are my two favorite current. I use a lot of things. I've mainly used turkey tail and lion's mane and agarikon all these years, but nowadays I'm really excited. I'm excited about all of it. It's a lot of fun, but saving people's lives and having people come to me and saying, we've had to have cancer surgery for our skin cancer every 3 months for the last 5 years. And we just went in and they told us, come back in a year.
Wow. Yeah.
And that was after just a month. I had given them the cream a month before their last exam.
Well, keep up the good work, man. That is really incredible. I'm so excited. Like, yeah. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, I'll get out of here so I don't distract you guys.
It was a pleasure talking to you.
Okay, take care.
Bye. Wow. All right, let's do this. Okay. Fantastic. So let's see, let me get my list here. Oh yeah. So for those of you who don't know, one, like Michael Beug, holy crap, I cannot believe that story he just told. Like that was what a speaker. That was amazing. Okay, I'll keep my mind from blowing until later on that one. The Farm Bureau news, for those of you who haven't seen, so Amy, my partner, is on the board of the Rensselaer County Farm Bureau, and we were delegates for the state policy meeting last week. And through several votes, we support acknowledging psilocybin-containing mushrooms as an upcoming agricultural crop put into the policy book. And the woman who read the policy mispronounced psilocybin, and about 30 people in the audience yelled out how to say it. And they said, well, that's the section. That's all we have, and that someone has to second it. Like I support a motion to pass. I second it. Any discussion? Not a single person stood up and asked a question. And out of all 52 counties across New York State, all the farmers in 52 counties across New York State, they unanimously voted to adopt that policy. So that is now getting printed in all of the 2025 Farm Bureau books that get distributed to every single lawmaker in New York, or every single New York lawmaker. So as a resource for us now to advocate with is, when we go to a lawmaker, we could say, well, have you read, this? Did you see that the Farm Bureau supports this? And they carry quite a bit of weight. So I know Corinne mentioned going to members and getting policy passed up. So we just did it. Like it happened. And we need to get nurses and psychiatrists and doctors and do the same thing, because I cannot. The policy person came over to me and was like, listen, it took cannabis about 10 years to get into the policy book. and you're probably going to get voted down the first time, and there's probably going to be a lot of discussion. So I've been, I had all my notes. I was ready to like reason with people. No, 30 people were just like, oh yeah, psilocybin, let's go. Let's go. And then everybody so that happened. So that is now a thing. And yeah, we're going to carry that forward, and maybe for the February 4th lobby day, we can have a farmer specific like table or something, as farmers support this, so you should too. So David Stein, if you can take a minute, 5:30 was a February 4th specific meeting for people who are going to be available to volunteer. So can you bring us up to speed? Oh. Did you fix it?
All right. Yeah, you got it. I'll premise and finish with a plea for a volunteer. We need help. We need some bodies, to volunteer in a number of ways. And it'll be Eileen Brewer will be the contact person for that. Eileen also volunteered to be the chair for all of this. She does. She is the president of Cluster Busters, but she's also an event coordinator in her day job. So she agreed to be the coordinator for this event. Corinne, who's our secretary, organized this meeting. She's crazy busy, but she was thrilled that there were 8 of us at the meeting, and equally thrilled that Eileen was willing to pick up the ball. So she'll be the contact person for anybody who has time to volunteer for anyone of a number of facets for this. Some of the things and we have apparently an intern for this also. There was Susie May, who was at the meeting. It has an internship that's coming up that her school will sponsor, SUNY will sponsor, and she's going to work directly under Corinne for this. So we have an intern who can take a lot of this work. So that's also a really good news. We discussed some specifics. One being, do we want to do a press release saying we are starting this campaign? We've done press releases saying we're supporting the legislation, but a press release saying we are initiating this campaign, and we are supporting any legislation that will move to that end. Apparently in New York State, legislation needs to be reintroduced every 2 years. So 3 of these bills are going to be reintroduced this year. And there's a brand new bill that we helped sponsor with Amy Poland, or we helped write with Amy Poland, that's going to be introduced this year. So, that could be part of the press release. But it was agreed by the 8 of the meeting that yes, we should do that and make a statement with that. I think it was Mike McGuire. I think we need to get a list from you, Avery, of all the groups that participated in this for the last 2 years, because we want to make sure we have all 12 tables available to us filled. And the obvious place to start there is by going to the groups that have already participated. So one of the people in the meeting, I forget exactly which one, will be in touch with you, because I think you're the keeper of that knowledge. That was the big stuff.
That's awesome. Eileen is fantastic. She came to the first lobby when we had a full week. And so she was there with the Cluster Busters and Joe. There's a folder. It's shared with multiple people. So who is going to be the point person to communicate with those groups?
Yeah, so Avery, if you send it to me, this is Kevin. Hey everyone. Yes, connect it with me if I even have it already. Sorry that I'm not finding it. And then I'll be the one who sort of reaches out and tries to get people to join.
Fantastic. Cool. Yeah, and that's really exciting. And really, it's February 4th, which is early in February, and we're already on December 10th. So we only have like 2 months to get this together.
Yep. Oh, it looks like you're muted.
You're muted, David.
Maybe it was my cat.
There we go.
We agreed to meet every other Monday at the same time at 5 o'clock. It was going to be Tuesday, but then we realized that Tuesday was not only Christmas Eve but New Year's Eve. So I'm sure that probably Corinne will release something. No, Eileen said she would release an invitation to the next meeting and so include everybody, but that will probably be 2 weeks from yesterday.
Cool. Yeah, and I'll put an email out to the whole group, and I'll include that information too. So if you want to email me, whatever is critical, like I guess the Eileen as a contact, Kevin reaching out to groups.
It was Corinne put it in a Google Doc, and I would guess that she sent that to you also.
Okay, fantastic. Well, and also in the room we have Robert Rush, who helped combat the DEA with DOI and DOC.
Yeah, those are the two strange, obscure research chemicals the DEA was trying to ban. DOI, though, is the one that's really important. For a research perspective, that's the last unscheduled 5-HT2A serotonin receptor agonist available for research, and she's cited in over 900 NIH papers just because it's just kind of a reference standard for any time you're working with this. So incredibly important tool. There's no evidence of its use by humans ever anywhere. There's not a single documented emergency room visit, no toxicology reports, no really diversion or anything. It's baffling why the DEA wants to destroy a bunch of research. It also seriously impact psychedelic research, because if you're looking into any sort of a classical psychedelic, you're probably going to at some point be looking at this as a kind of a reference standard measuring the effects of that psychedelic or novel psychedelics that are created. But ended up we got a hearing to challenge them on this, and I was representing researcher working with SSDP and their counsel, and ended up having our hearing a couple of weeks ago. Had a 6-day hearing in DEA headquarters, and went extremely well. We quite frankly, embarrassed the government with their evidence. And Hamilton Morris was there and covered it the entire time. He's got it on his podcast. It's very entertaining recap. I highly recommend checking out. But we have our post-hearing brief due on the 6th, and I think we have a real potential to kind of change the interpretation of the law potentially. And we've already got recognized harm to research as a factor that can be considered in the scheduling process that the DA was arguing against, shockingly enough. So hopefully we'll see where it goes. We have a bunch of battles that continue on this, but we're a lot further, and a lot more positive things happen than we had initially anticipated. Just taking on the DEA is kind of a daunting task.
Sure. Wow. Fantastic. Thank you for the work that you're doing. Yeah.
Thanks for all the work NYMHA is doing and continues to do.
Yeah. Well, fantastic. Well, unless anyone else has any other agenda items, Pammy, how are you? Dennis, you guys, board members, good to see you guys here.
Good to be here. I'm looking forward to my new schedule in 2025, allowing me to get here a lot sooner but thanks for bearing with me, in latecomer that I am.
And Pammy, how's it going with you? Everything's great?
Hello. Yeah, everything's going pretty good on this end in Brooklyn. Happy to see everyone gathered on officially the last day or the last NYMA meeting in this Color City Mushrooms building.
Yeah, but it's not going to be the last NYMA meeting. So we just
Mhm.
probably so January will probably be virtual only.
Mhm.
And Indian Ladder Farms is where we're moving, and they have multiple really nice public areas and some private spaces. So we might be able to use one of their spaces for our meetings in person, and then for Zoom.
Awesome. That
Awesome.
sounds fantastic. Apologies in advance to hear my cat. She's very into this meeting.
Love it. All are welcome.
Question for Robert on what that podcast was.
It's just Hamilton Mars. If you go on Spotify and search Hamilton Mars, there's a just his podcast. I don't know if there's a specific name for it in it.
Okay. I just didn't catch the name the first time. Hamilton Mars.
Morris.
Morris.
Oh, it's Hamilton Morris. Okay, got it. Know who that guy is. Awesome. Thanks.
Cool.
Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining in, and David, thank you for the report back. And we'll see you all soon. No way to stop.